I say this, all right, we can talk critique for days. Everybody has a negative critique that has to go with everything that goes with rugby, and I can do it. So I want to provide some solutions. I want to provide some solutions for some people to be able to go ahead and get their idea of what needs to be done with this. So this is my opinion of what needs to be done that the MLR and subsequently rugby, because this is a worldwide event. This is hitting Premiership rugby. People will say, oh, top 14 in Japan League One are protected. They're not. Top 14 gets buku billionaires. They have billionaires that just spend, but they just can't have any debt. So they are constantly spending. It is an ego game, similar to what was happening in Russia maybe about 15 years ago. It's an ego game, but and Japan League One is now officially separated out from the corporation, so it doesn't run in the same factor as it did pre-Rugby World Cup because they wanted to change the model for that. So, like I said, I want to talk about what are some solutions that MLR needs to do and subsequently rugby needs to do so that they can save themselves and subsequently we can save rugby and the development and upward mobility that rugby should absolutely be having as a result of this. All right. So, number one that I can say right off the bat, yo, we need to invest in the children. All right, now, before everybody goes, oh, no, there's academies. Oh, my goodness, we're already doing that. Hold up. I'm not saying that that's wrong. The academies have been good. I think it was a great thing for the MLR academies to actively, be created as a result. I think the problem that's been had is that the academies are far more of a recruiting base than they are a development base. All right. So Utah Warriors, I think, have a great element for it. The Utah Warriors, because Utah actually has a really good rugby system. They have a great U12, U8 going up to club and subsequently to the professional side. That's something that needs to be replicated across board because it's not just to be able to get players, but it's to be able to get our viewing base over the course of the next 20 years. The reason why a lot of these other sports that had professional leagues were able to sustain despite any constriction or problems that they had is that they already had an entry point because they already had a young viewer base. Again, we talk about the NFL. The NFL was derived because of the popularity that college football had. And college football was way more popular than the NFL, way up until maybe the late 80s, early 90s, maybe late 70s, early 80s. It was way more popular than the NFL. And then around the 90s and then the early 2000s, the NFL absolutely overtook everybody. But there was already that base that was kicked in from high school football to college football. And the power and appeal of college football was what was able to sustain the NFL as people were getting over the ridiculous idea that professionalism is a poor idea. Same thing that happened with basketball. You had already people pre-existingly playing basketball, and they subsequently were able to go through the college system that held everything together, which meant that they needed recruits that was done through the high school system, which means that you started kids young and then was able to matriculate up until the NBA. In the USA particularly, we do not have a strong youth base. And the thing is, this is where the MLR really, when you talk about that collective money being done, yes, it needs to go into, player welfare and standard, but you really needed to build on your youth base. Like you really needed to build on that youth base because without them, there's nothing moving forward. You can pay in and recruit early on, but if that part is not being fed, we're not going to have any consistency in terms of financing. All right. That's the first thing that I say that needed to get done on for MLR. Number two, you need to follow Ray Guy. Now, who's Ray Guy? I think if you guys saw the movie The Founder, Ray Guy was the McDonald's, let's say, mastermind. Not the founder, because two brothers founded, McDonald's brothers founded, but with the mastermind to the growth of the McDonald's franchises. All right. His idea was that there should be McDonald's everywhere. and it is something that is now become the franchise model. But what was most important about what Ray Guy was doing was not that he was making the best burgers, because we know McDonald's doesn't, wasn't making the best food because that's not what McDonald's does. His thing was consistency, which we can all say, field being on the field, being able to play regularly, that's normal. But his other thing was real estate. You have to own the real estate, and then you can absolutely lease out to franchises, where the franchises now become money makers in themselves. When it comes to MLR, it doesn't have a whole lot of real estate. Now, in rugby in total, there's obviously stadiums and just shared ones and et cetera like that. But one of the biggest drivers of money for professional sports teams are their stadium costs. Now, again, don't start with me being like, yo, stadiums are expensive. We had a few. Houston SaberCats got one. Yes. Houston SaberCats are definitely on the right arena when it comes to that. Stadiums are the number one thing that's needed, but that's not always possible. Nobody always has $150 million to put together a great stadium, or even like $1 million. Like, it is a process to put a stadium together. And the U.S. has more stadiums per capita than probably any other country in the world. All right. We got stadiums for days with football. So we have to kind of work with the resources that we have. But it does not mean that we are limited to that real estate. Okay. So this is where I go to the MLR, all that money that had been feeding in, that's going into production. I'm not going to production, but like that's going into pooling the best players from overseas to provide a level of credibility, should have been going into real estate. Now, what other real estate am I talking about? Tony Rendell, who is a former player, if you guys don't know, out of Seattle, great guy. He said it perfectly. Rugby in the United States must become a real estate play. You guys can see his full thing on Facebook. Just look up his name. It's pretty easy to be able to find. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that he was like, yo, we need to get the real estate. And he's like, the SaberCats had the right ownership because they can benefit from non-rugby events. 100%. But there's other real estate, like restaurants. What does that mean? It's a place that secures additional streams of income. And some of these are not my ideas. Some of these come from friends and discussions. A lot of these are my ideas, though. But some of these like this are not necessarily always it. These are pretty common ideas. If you guys remember the UFC, or let's not even go UFC, ESPN, and they did their restaurants at the time. Mind you, they didn't end up working. But the idea was like, yo, you need to have a place where people can go that holds your name. Maybe it's more of the Trump effect, where you lease your name onto restaurants, or you lease your titling onto somebody else to be able to use it as an established spot where people can give you new forms of income that are not just the game itself. So I use restaurants. It could be pubs. Those needed to get built. And not because of the fact that this is a tradition of rugby, but it's legitimately a place where additional streams, where if a person doesn't necessarily want to come to the rugby match, they can go to a rugby affiliated business and be able to create money for that business. And when you're talking about the level of money that comes from the investors that have gone into MLR, and if you see the money that it comes from, investing in some of these things would have been good. But hey, let's say you don't want to do a restaurant. Let's say restaurant is too much. Gyms. The UFC mastered this. I don't know if you guys probably seen, especially in the US, UFC gyms are everywhere. What was the concept? Hey, I want to train like the fighters. Why? Let me go to the UFC gym. Everybody knows UFC gyms are basically just like CrossFit gyms. To some extent, they're boxing gyms to some extent. They're not a completely new idea, but the perception of them were completely different. Why couldn't the MLR maybe not built a whole new franchise, but tried to work on saying a partnership lease with a gym franchise to say, this is an MLR gym. You want to learn to play rugby like the pros? Come here. And that becomes a new source of revenue. You can use that for your club players. So now you can use them as members into your region. So if a person like, I'm using New Orleans because it's my hometown area, home state area. But let's say like New Orleans had the capability. they had gone and gotten a gym like work with 24-hour fitness, or we don't have an LA Fitness, or work with Planet Fitness, and said, this is the official MLR gym. All right. You want to learn to play rugby? Yo, you want to go to this gym. And yo, if you have a rugby membership, yo, you can go ahead and get a discount over here. And the part of that will go for us, but we'll make sure that you're locked in. And this becomes part of your club fees. I remember talking to my boy Mick, who was talking about his club in Ireland, where for the cost of membership dues for rugby, they would have access to the gyms, the lockers, multiple fields. Obviously, you have the pubs and everything, and it becomes like an actual place where people reside in. But most importantly, it's an additional revenue source that even if you don't play rugby, you can go there to feel like one of the rugby players, because emotions are number one thing that get people going. Emotions are the number one thing that get people buying. All right. So it would have been an additional revenue source. And then you can inoculate people into going to your games. You play the games, you play the replays inside the locations. You are able to go ahead and provide gear, provide access to support, provide a location where people can say, oh, this is where I can go find other clubs. This is where I can train. And it's something that's scalable too, because of the fact that you don't have to be locked into that rental space. Basically, that would be the stadium that you use, because if you don't have the money to build a stadium, well, you're renting out the stadium, which means you need to be able to have that. So not having real estate, not having something that was franchisable, not having something to be able to hold on to that you could use in addition to your actual league effects played in. This is something that should be done. This is something that needs to be flipped, because again, it builds your fan base. All right. Number three, you guys saw something in the wrong place. Number three, yo, you need to change your in-game entertainment. All right. This is one that I think is a little bit closer to home. Guys, you take an excerpt from the book of Savannah Bananas. All right. Now, I'm not saying to go crazy and parody just like Savannah Bananas as a minor league team, but we've seen the level of popularity that comes with being able to play up inside your stadium and create the experience for your home teams. Now, I know sometimes music and you get a DJ from time to time, but I'm talking about like, is it entertainment? When you're talking about what did the NBA and the NFL do to be able to get up, the NBA and MLB for Major League Baseball were notorious for the most wild, ridiculous in-game entertainment situations that ever happened. What we're talking about, the t-shirt gun, we're talking about the cheerleaders, we're talking about the games in between. This is what helped bring fans in, and minor league baseball is now doing this to a further extent. Even NHL and NBA still do these things in between. We see them at the halftime, the shot, the puck hit, for football, throwing inside the hole. All these things still exist, but we're not doing them for the MLR. And I've been to a couple MLR games. Once again, talking on the announcers is one thing, but you've got to be able to put things that make people feel like children. Again, you got to make people feel like children because they're at a game, and that's what helps the engagement that much more. So I feel like this is one that would have been much better for creating memorable effects. And like I said, Savannah Bananas have been able to completely change their entire revenue model as a result of being able to do this little concept. They became a whole touring minor league baseball team and just shot up their revenue almost like 100% plus since where they were first bought. According to a franchise that was being mortgaged, that was held together by the house mortgage of the family that bought them, that clearly couldn't afford them. So this has been I want to say maybe the overly pureness of the sport happening, and it's you can't. And again, this is passionate owners who played rugby or had an association with rugby wanting to be franchise owners. I get it, but you have to do better. And this is going to lead me into my next thing. Yo, it is time for a change. This one's going to be particularly harsh. And I'm going to disclaim this by saying, I don't think the people that are working on it are bad people. I don't think that the people who are in these positions are have not tried to put the best effort that they can. But I do not think that they are viable anymore for where you've been trying to go, and especially whenever it comes to trying to retain in new revenue sources for your franchises. But it's time for you guys to fire your media team. That's the people at the Rugby Network. It's time to fire the administrative heads who run the Rugby Network, who run your entertainment and creative for the MLR and administration. They need to be fired. They've done the best that they can for the last 5 years. It has not worked because it is very clear, very, very clear, either their level of disconnect from the general public is evident, or the inability to convince the owners to invest. One of those two things, because I can see where owners are using their own past history to be able to, provide entertainment for the rest of the league versus when something modern is coming in. This is what I'm going to say is going to be very controversial, but your stuff is whack. The biggest thing that you guys did was for the championships last year at Red Bull Stadium. You brought in Shaq. You had what was it? Not Fleetwood Mac. What's the Irish band? The Fast, whatever that Irish band that everybody in European rugby love. Like you brought them in. I get it. In the 80s, in the 90s, traditional rugby, Irish jigs and those chants and everything. That's the key. That's the memory. That's the nostalgia. Man, when I tell you that does not make any sense hasn't made sense since 2010. Let's be perfectly honest with you. Hasn't made sense since 2010. It definitely doesn't make sense in 2023, into 2020s at all. Y'all, it is old. It is old, and dare I say, incredibly white. And I'm not just saying that as a racial element. I'm actually talking from a cultural standpoint. It is incomprehensibly wrong. And the only reason I say this is because you can see it. It is not engaging. Not engaging. I'm not even talking to a black audience or a mix. I'm talking about all audiences youth-wise. Yo, rugby right now, I would make the argument, probably has an average age of maybe 50 years old who are their viewers. Probably an average age, which it shouldn't be. We should have an average age of somewhere around 29. We should be lower than what hockey is. We should definitely be lower than lacrosse, and we should definitely be lower than the NBA for damn sure. NFL and MLB should be the oldest audiences because they have the greatest discretionary fund and they've been around the longest. We should have a young audience, and right now your media does not work for that. All right. Other thing that needs to be found, that needs to be changed in terms of the media as a result, is that the MLR should function in the equivalency of a record label. What does that mean? All right. A record label's job was at the time to be a bank for musicians. Now, I'm not saying about how, screw over players or screw over artists. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what the basic idea of it is, was that you find talent, you invest in talent, you develop talent, and then you sell the talent. And you are able to find new talent at a low cost rate, invest to be able to get a large return. When I look at the media that has been going on in rugby, we especially look on the Rugby Network, you're getting the same 6 people over and over. And again, I'm not saying they're not doing their job or they're not trying. I'm just saying you have basically the same thing over and over and over and over. Not a near new talent has been found. Not a near new media personality that has been established has been added in there. You barely develop anybody. You literally, this is the equivalent of like World Rugby not investing in Squidge Rugby, but taking them down. You literally have the capability at a low price to invest and then do it. Here's something that I would have said to do whenever you're discovering talent. Dude, yo, we need to create new programming, all right? And I'm going to go into programming a little bit later. We need to create new programming. We don't want to pay a whole lot of money for it. You can't keep doing this for free because you're not getting the production quality that you need to be able to get. But we need new ideas because we only know what we know, all right? We only know what you know. So why don't we do a, $5,000 fund, all right? Have people send in short videos, like not like YouTube, like short ideas of what could be rugby programming, what could be a TV show on here, what could be a documentary, something. And then we'll judge that, and we'll give out $1,000 for each one of these for the winners, for 5 winners to be able to create this new program, and we'll give them $1,000 to be able to develop a little bit more. I'm telling you, you get a whole different level of creativity. You have a whole different level of engagement. You have a whole different level of community that you add because now you've added the film and acting community. You have people who have maybe not ever thought about it, trying to put stuff out, and even the ones that don't win. Put out their stuff. Let it be rated. Let it be voted on. Let it be seen. Give it the time. And now you get free content. You sign those personalities on top of that to your network. And then you go and say, look, you go ahead and make what we need. Make the program that you want, and we'll put it on here. We'll sell it. Give you the cuts and licenses and royalties that go with it. And we'll be able to distribute it out where we need to on the Rugby Network. Or, if we need to, we can go sell it on Netflix. We can sell it on Hulu, because for whatever it's worth, we at least have people who have money and power so we can be able to maybe create connection. You do that, you create a whole new engagement process altogether because that's what people actually do. You need stuff that is the face of you. And as a newly rugby established league, you can be that A&R, discovering the talent. Don't be the Premiership Rugby where you're recycling the same old hags over and over. Have you looked at the podcast? All it is former player. Oh, goof humor, accent. That's literally all that you got. That's the same thing every single time. It's a New Zealander. It's an Englishman. Typically, it's an Englishman, another Englishman, an additional Englishman. You don't even get a variation of them. It's like a variation of a lock and a prop and a flanker. And we just use that in a cycle within the sprinkle of a wing and a fly half in the middle there. Just a sprinkle here and there. But it's basically just your big guys and then a sprinkle inside there. Like, you could completely change the game because you're an innovator. You're new. You're allowed to be innovative in this point. So to not do that, you're losing money. This is an additional stream of income because it allows you to be able to create legitimate distribution for that. So that's one part that just you could do better. Next, this is where it goes into the programming. You need a better funnel of programming. This is why you need a different media team because right now your programming, what you guys are doing is literally just gathering up games, but you're not doing anything with it. Yes, the Rugby Network just put together a whole new podcast show with Alex Corbacero and Will Hooley, and they're going to talk about college rugby and international rugby and premiership. Basically, we're going to talk about all the rugby that's happening on the Rugby Network, while we also have the show MLR Weekly or whatever it's called with Stacey Patz and the guy that's with Stacey Patz that nobody actually watches. Why? Because you're literally repeating the same show over and over again. Where are the shows that the kids are going to do? Where are the shows that you get young adults to do? Where is the show that you actually now attack to the adults? You know who was a very big genius in being able to do this? Ted Turner. If you don't know who Ted Turner, he's the guy who founded TNT, the Television Turner Network, something like that. TNT, Cartoon Network. This man is instrumental in creating Captain Planet, basically creating helping create Toonami. This man was like, he's a genius. Company all based out in Atlanta. This man understood the concept of funnel. He made CNN, whether you hate it or love it, it's still one of the most watched news channels in the world. He knew that while news sells, and he was the one that created 24-hour news, while news sells, your audience for that is only going to be stipulated based off of who's coming up behind you. And he made the children's programming not only just to make money, but to do over reprogramming. He was an environmentalist. This is why we got Captain Planet. He was, oh God, what was the rest of it? Man, he was an environment. He was a crazy guy, to be honest with you. He was actually a kook, but he was like a genius kook. And he was able to create this where you now establish a consistency in it. And what's happened since creating that? It created shows like Freakazoid, Earthworm Jim, Range Rovers, aforementioned Captain Planet. Then it moved to shows that brought in anime, which brought a whole new spur 20 years down the line. And I'm not saying it needs to take 20 years. I'm saying you create the funnel of having people in. You start off buying into it, and then you naturally progress it. But you got nothing for children. You have nothing for adolescents. You have nothing for college students. All you have are games. And let me tell you, nobody's even watching the games because you don't have any storylines to the games. So your funnel doesn't even work to be able to progress people over there. Yes, you're going to have two guys who you've seen talk on other channels about the same exact thing over and over again. But instead of using the investments that you have capability to have to be able to create more intricacy, to be able to get down to your youth, get down to the parents, get down to the adolescents, get down to the 20-year-olds and college students and feel like they're connected into it, you just say, we're going to put more games and feel like this is Field of Dreams, where if you see it, they'll come. You paid money for Premiership Rugby. Why the hell did you pay money for your literal competition? You said, oh, we need to attract people in. You didn't need Premiership Rugby. You need a better funnel to be able to go do your stuff. So that would be the one thing. That's the other thing that would help MLR and rugby in general to be able to improve significantly. It attaches you to the community. And lastly, but not least, all right, this is one specifically from my boy Mick, but I agree with it wholeheartedly. You need to create and sell your own physical products. All right. And this was well said. This was well explained. You guys can actually check out the interview with Michael Feely. I forgot what it is. It's inside the interviews. But what I mean by create and own your own product is you have the distribution and the titleage of being Major League Rugby. Just like the similarity that I said with buying real estate, you do the same thing with product. Yes, you can keep renting shorts out from Paladin, or I think now they're with, I forgot, the one that starts with a K. Now Kaplan, with Kaplan or something like that. It's not about creating jerseys that they sell. It's creating jerseys and balls in general. Like, they should kind of be your competition. Yeah, they've helped in, obviously get in, but the thing that rugby people need are kit, balls, shoes, mouthpieces, and basically instruction, but that's more digital product. If you're able to have a production in one of these and say this is the official MLR gear, or you partner with one of these lineups and actually, like, instead of just being like, yo, this is an MLR and this is for this specific team, but we don't really have too many that have a name behind it, and we don't really promote our players enough up to be able to elevate the name so that it goes to it. It's like, no, create a kit that goes on the tab, not on the shirt, on the tab, and say this one gets distributed to teams. So whenever your college teams, your high school teams, your youth teams want to play, they're going to be playing. They're going to have an MLR insignia on their stuff, but they're going to have their actual team name on there because it's an MLR brand, not just MLR promoted. It's an MLR brand, and this would create an additional revenue source. Once again, you can partner with one of these companies to be able to do it. There's so many damn kit companies that are here. I don't know how much I can tell you how often I'm getting hit up, not really by the US ones, by ones in Pakistan and India and China. Honestly, most of those kits are already coming from those places. You already have the brand, the distribution, at least the distribution of the teams to be able to say, be like this player, run like this person, do like this, and be able to go ahead instead and switch that over to being able to create the brand that works for you and yourself, and be able to do that distributively and it scale to everybody else who needs it. it would change it. Again, it's the equivalent of UFC having their gloves. UFC literally does the UFC model works. It works. Minus the pay-per-view. You can't do pay-per-view. You don't have enough viewership for that. But actually, honestly, if you did, no, don't do pay-per-view. Don't do pay-per-view. I'm to knock that one out. But selling your own version of merch or your own line is far greater than simply just promoting a brand that also just has your logo. You're not promoting because you don't get a cut. You're just getting either free gear or you're hoping that it gets a percentage cut that you still have to split with the players, or you should, from that. When in reality, it could be like how Adidas did with Kanye West. Like that's really the direction. And it goes back to what I said before. Be a label. Discover and develop your own talent. Not just on the field, off the field. That's where the work is done. So, y'all, that's my thought and process when it comes to this. I don't think I'm going to continue on. There's other stuff to talk about, but I don't want to continue on with the rest of it. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on all of this. I know I've rambled. I know I might have said a whole lot, but I think it's incredibly important because rugby is in a huge recession. This is like the copper era of rugby happening right now. We got the Olympics high, but we're also losing tremendous amounts of money, and it doesn't feel like we've recovered since the pandemic. And honestly, we were kind of on fool's gold previous to the pandemic anyways. So like in the U.S. particularly, it's so necessary that we have to be innovative and we have to be savvy. Whenever Kimball Kajar is talking about we need to be acting like startups, we're not acting like startups. We're acting like an established product that is just looking to be able to increase. We're not established. We need to be startup. We need to be able to be scrappy. We need to be able to play guerrilla warfare with our sports so that we can break through the line. We need to get through it. And once again, I typically wouldn't have an issue except for the fact that we literally got billionaires, multimillionaires, and 100 millionaires that are invested in the league and refuse to actually do more than just the bare minimum. And they're losing $50 million a year for doing the bare minimum. I'm not saying they're not passionate. I'm not saying they're not trying to do the best they can. I'm saying they don't know enough to do the things they need to because it's clearly not working. And this is an overall effect, but we can only work within niches and elements like that. As a person who's done events and created stuff, when you have no money and you're like, dude, just give me a scrap in, bruh, you can go do magnificent stuff because when you're broke, you actually have to think and you actually have to figure your stuff out. MLR and USA Rugby and rugby in general, almost all, but USA Rugby and MLR are broke. We broke folk. We're not rich. We're broke and we need to play like broke folk. We just happen to be broke folk that have an investable concept and a high ceiling that's behind us. But that money ain't doing anything if we're not doing broke stuff. Like we need to do broke folk stuff. So let me know what you guys thought. You guys can absolutely hit me up in the comments. Absolutely talk it up. Obviously, we'll break this down. Let me know in the podcast. Send me a DM. Yell at me. Call me up. I don't care. I'm willing to have the conversation. More importantly, I'm willing to help on the execution. But that's if you're down to be able to do it. Anybody say I can't, I say